She made me bow for 11 seconds longer than protocol required. I counted. That is what I do in difficult rooms. I count things. The number of guests. The number of exit doors. The number of seconds a 26-year-old queen decides to hold a man in a position of submission in front of 400 people who are all pretending not to notice. 11 seconds. Then she spoke. The Serenthi language has 11 levels of address. The 11th level, the most formal of all, is reserved for exactly two categories of communication: matters of infrastructure and creatures that are not considered fully intelligent. Broken pipes qualify for it. Livestock qualify for it. Things that require management rather than conversation. She used that register. She looked at me, kneeling on the polished floor of the grandest reception hall on Serenthi Prime, surrounded by the most powerful figures on the planet, and she said clearly in that 11th level register so that every single person in the room could hear, "The earth creature may rise. We were told your kind had learned manners. The lesson appears incomplete." The laughter that followed was restrained, controlled, the particular kind of laughter that people in formal settings allow themselves when they want to laugh openly, but also want to appear too refined for open laughter. A soft, knowing ripple that traveled across 400 guests and settled into the air like something permanent. I rose. I looked at her. Queen Sailvoreth was 26 years old in Serenthi years, which counts to roughly 19 in the way that actually matters, new to real power, freshly crowned, standing inside a court full of people who had spent years waiting to see what kind of queen she would choose to become. They had helped her build this moment. Someone had suggested it. Someone had told her that putting a third-tier human attaché down in a public setting would establish something important about the kind of ruler she intended to be. She was extraordinary. I will say that once and not again. She was the kind of mind that processes information the way precision instruments process data, quickly, efficiently, without sentiment getting in the way. She had planned this. She had chosen me deliberately, I would later learn, because third tier was low enough in status that diminishing me cost nothing politically, but visible enough in the room that doing it sent a message to everyone who mattered. She looked at me with the expression of someone who had made their point. I held her gaze for 3 seconds, not as a challenge, not out of anything that could be called anger, with the specific quality of attention a man gives something he is recording for permanent storage. I said nothing. I turned around. I walked away. Not quickly, not slowly, the way a door closes when no one has slammed it. The music resumed behind me. Serenthi court music is structured and mathematical, designed to make a room feel infinite. The 400 guests redistributed their attention to other things. The moment passed. They always pass. I stopped at the refreshment table near the east wall. A small dish held something the Serenthi called a verath, violet, gelatinous. A small, dense cube of a thing that I had been encountering at Serenthi functions for 3 years and had never once found a way to enjoy. The texture was wrong in a way I could not explain, and the flavor was approximately what overconfidence would taste like if someone found a way to press it into food. I picked one up, I ate it slowly. I picked up another. The east wall of the hall had a large window that looked out over the Serenthi capital at night. The city spread below like a diagram of itself, towers that curved inward at the tops, streets arranged in wide, deliberate spirals, light sources positioned at precise angles to eliminate shadows entirely, everything illuminated, nothing dark, a city that had decided at the level of its architecture that shadow was a design flaw to be corrected. I stood there and looked at it and finished my verath and thought about nothing in particular. Colin Drake appeared at my shoulder. He was 24 years old, one of our mission's junior aides, and still at the stage of his career where large events registered immediately and visibly on his face. His face at that particular moment was doing something complicated. It looked like controlled alarm wearing the costume of professionalism. "Marcus," he said. "Colin," I said. "Should I be filing something? Because Ambassador Cole is going to want a report, and I am not entirely certain how to." "Category 3, I said. "Protocol irregularity." He paused. "Category 3 is for scheduling conflicts." "I know what it is for," I said. He looked at the Varath in my hand. He looked at my face. He made the intelligent, professional decision to stop asking questions. "Understood," he said. He left. I set the dish down. I stood at the window for another 8 minutes while the reception moved around me. People drifted past. Conversations shifted. The event redistributed itself, the way events do, filling the space left by anything that is no longer generating noise. Ambassador Patrick Cole found me before I reached the exit. Patrick was a careful man, experienced. He had been our senior diplomatic presence on Serenthi Prime for 11 years, which meant he had developed the kind of patience that only grows in a person who has spent a decade being classified as a permanent guest. He was good at his job. He understood the weight of things. He stood beside me at the window. Neither of us looked at each other for a moment. We looked at the city. "Marcus," he said. "Patrick," I said. "I saw what happened." "Yes," I said. "What are you thinking?" I considered the question. It deserved a real answer. "I'm thinking," I said, "that this city would be more interesting with some shadows." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She put you down in front of every diplomat on this planet." "She tried to," I said. "That is a different thing." "What is the difference, practically speaking?" "The process requires both parties," I said. "I decline to be one of them." He looked at me sideways. Long diplomatic experience had given Patrick the ability to have a conversation with a person's silence as easily as with their words. He read mine, and he did not like what he found there. "There will be an expectation of response," he said. "From you, from the mission, something on the record." "Then there will be a wait," I said. I set my untouched drink on the windowsill. I straightened my diplomatic sash, the narrow gray band that marked third-tier status in our mission structure, and turned toward the exit. "Good night, Patrick," I said. I collected my coat. I stepped outside. The night air on Serenthi Prime smelled like copper and something sweeter that I had spent 3 years attempting to identify and never successfully named. The city surrounded me, bright, ordered, certain of itself. I had been on this planet for 3 years. I had attended 214 official functions across that time. I had memorized all 11 honorific registers. I had eaten the food, including the Varath, without complaint. I had listened carefully and consistently to conversations that were meant for my ears and many that were not. And in those 3 years, I had understood something about the Serenthi court that I had never entered into any official report. They did not think humans were dangerous. They thought we were earnest, enthusiastic, a younger species still figuring out the rules of galactic civilization. Small, one planet, manageable. We were third tier because third tier was where you put things that had not yet earned the right to a higher number. The Queen had just confirmed that belief, loudly, in front of everyone who mattered on this world. That was fine. People who believe they are looking down rarely look sideways. They almost never look forward. They generally do not look at what is already being built quietly in the spaces they are not watching. I walked to my transport. I went home. I slept without difficulty because I always do. In the morning there was work to do, and the morning was exactly where I needed it to be. The first meeting request arrived before I had finished breakfast. Not from a Serenthi official, from the Drevani consul. His name was Velorath, and he was, by the most conservative estimate, 340 years old. The Drevani are a long-lived species. They have the kind of memory that does not blur or soften with distance. When they remember something, They remember it the way stone remembers the shape of the water that carved it completely, and in a way that does not fade. He requested a private meeting at his consular residence, not at the shared diplomatic complex where third-tier missions like mine operated. At his residence, which was a distinction that meant something in Serenthi diplomatic culture, though I was careful not to let Colin Drake know I knew that when I told him to accept. The Drevani residence sat on the north edge of the capital, in a district that the Serenthi had allocated for senior Allied missions. It was older than most of the surrounding buildings. The architecture was Drevani in origin, lower to the ground than Serenthi design, with thick walls and narrow windows, built for a species that had historically lived in places where caution was a survival trait. Veloreth met me in a room that contained no screens, no display panels, no recording equipment of any visible kind. Just 2 chairs, a low table, and a window that looked onto a small interior garden of gray stone and pale, carefully arranged plants that I did not recognize. He poured 2 cups of something that smelled like deep water and old wood. He set one in front of me without asking if I wanted it. He sat down. He looked at me for a long moment with the compound eyes of his species, which do not blink the way human eyes do, and which have a way of making you feel that whatever they are examining has been examined thoroughly and filed completely. "We wanted to see," he said, "if you were the kind." I held the cup. The ceramic was warm. "What kind?" He folded his secondary hands together on the table. Drevani have 4 arms, 2 primary, 2 smaller and secondary, located lower on the torso. When they fold the secondary hands, it is the equivalent of a human taking a long, deliberate breath before saying something important. "There is a word in Drevani," he said. "It does not translate into Standard or into Serenthi. Literally, in the oldest form of our language, it means, the ones who count quietly." I waited. "It is not a common word," he said. "We do not apply it often. In my 340 years, I have applied it to perhaps 11 individuals." He paused. "Never to a human." I drank from the cup. It tasted like it smelled, deep and old, not unpleasant. "Until now," I said. "We will see," he said. "That is why you are here." He leaned back very slightly in his chair. In Drevani body language, that gesture signals the beginning of a longer story, something that needs to be told in full before anything else can be discussed. 83 years ago, he said, there was a human diplomat named Crawford. He was stationed on a world called Corinthus. He was senior rank, first tier, serving during the Corinthus Accords negotiations. During a formal session, the planetary governor of Corinthus publicly addressed him in a manner that was widely understood to be degrading. He looked at me steadily. Crawford smiled, he said. He apologized for whatever offense he might inadvertently have caused. His delegation issued a statement of appreciation for the hospitality of their hosts. They finished the negotiations. They went home. I set my cup down. 18 months later, Veloreth continued, Corinthus experienced what they called a supply disruption. The freight routes that they depended on for 3 categories of essential imports had been quietly restructured. New corridors had been established. Long-term contracts had been redirected. The infrastructure that Corinthus had relied upon for 2 generations had been methodically replaced by an alternative framework that did not include them as a necessary stop. He paused. The Corinthus trade bloc has never fully recovered. They are aware of what happened. They have never been able to demonstrate that the restructuring was deliberate. There is no record of any human official ever making a decision that was framed as a response to the Crawford incident. There is no document. There is no statement. There is no record of any meeting in which the Corinthus situation was discussed in those terms. He looked at me. There is only the outcome, he said. The garden outside the window was very still. The pale plants did not move. The gray stones held their positions without any opinion about holding them. Crawford smiled and apologized, Velorith said. You ate a small piece of violet food and walked away. The Verath, I said. Yes, something moved across his face that might have been the Drevani equivalent of dry amusement. The Verath. He leaned forward again, back to the closer position, back to the present tense of the conversation. We would like to discuss, he said, the proposed Northern Freight Corridor. I looked at him. The Northern Freight Corridor was a project that had been sitting in a Serenthi Ministry review queue for 14 months. It was a proposed infrastructure development that would restructure cargo movement through a significant section of the outer systems. It was, depending on how it was ultimately designed, either a project that benefited everyone roughly equally or a project that could be shaped to benefit specific parties considerably more than others. Our mission had submitted input on it 11 months ago, through official channels, as a third-tier party. Our input had been received and acknowledged and filed and had not been referenced since. Interesting timing, I said. Velorith poured more of the deep-water tea into my cup without being asked. The Drevani Consortium, he said, has been observing the corridor project with significant interest. We believe the current proposed routing has certain inefficiencies that a broader conversation might correct. What kind of broader conversation? I said. The kind, he said carefully, that includes parties who have demonstrated the capacity for long-term thinking. He said it simply, without drama, the way you state a fact that has been true for a long time and simply needed to be said out loud. I thought about Owen Harris, who had been part of my first contact team before Drevani Station. Owen had a saying that he used when situations began to shift in unexpected directions. He said, "Pay attention when the room changes because it is telling you something." The room had changed. I sat with that for a moment. When would the consortium want to begin? I said. We thought, Velorith said, that next week would be convenient. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. We discussed parameters, general frameworks, the list of parties who should be included in any broader conversation. By the time I left, 2 more meeting requests had arrived on my communicator. One from the Veshan Trade Delegation, one from the office of the Pelaran Systems Governor. Neither of them were from Serenthi officials. Colin Drake met me outside the Drevani residence with a transport and an expression that had moved well past controlled alarm into a region I did not have a clean name for. 3 meetings in one morning, he said, all senior parties, none of them Serenthi. Yes, I said. Because of last night. Yes, I said. Because you ate a Verath and walked away. I looked at him. He was a sharp young man. He was going to be very good at this work in 10 years when he had enough distance from events to stop being surprised by them. Colin, I said. Yes. File a meeting report for the Drevani session, Category 7. Category 7 was for strategic consultations with allied parties. He stared at me. Category 7 requires senior authorization. Then get it, I said. He looked at his communicator. He looked at me. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Get in the transport, I said. He got in the transport. I stood outside for a moment before following. The Serenthi capital surrounded me, bright and shadowless and confident in its own logic. Somewhere in the center of it, in the oldest and most deliberate building in the city, a 26-year-old queen was beginning her day. I wondered what she thought had happened last night. I was fairly certain she thought she had won something. She was not entirely wrong. The question was what she thought she had won, and what she did not yet know she had handed over in the process. The report came to me on the 4th day, not through official diplomatic channels, not through anything that could be traced to a named source. It came the way that most useful information comes to people who have spent long enough in a place to build the right kind of relationships, quietly, through a chain of conversations that each sound like something else. What it told me was this: Minister Keithan had not slept properly since the reception. Keithan was Sailvorth's senior advisor. He had served 3 queens in sequence, spanning nearly 90 years of Serenthi history. He had been present for 2 major economic restructurings, one succession crisis that the official histories described as a peaceful transition, and the event in the outer systems 17 years ago that everyone who had been paying attention still referred to only as what happened with the Marrow's Compact, because naming it directly meant acknowledging the full shape of it. He had agreed, reportedly, when the Queen's inner circle proposed the reception maneuver. He had agreed because she was new to her throne and needed to establish dominance, and because a third-tier human attaché was a low-cost target, and because no one in that room had expected the third-tier human attaché to respond the way I did. No one, apparently, except Keithan, who had approved the plan and then immediately regretted it and had not been sleeping since. I learned later, through the same chain of careful conversations, what he had said to her 4 days after the reception, when she finally noticed that her oldest advisor looked like a man carrying something he could not set down. She asked him what was bothering him. He asked her a question in return. "Do you know," he said, "why humans are classified as third tier?" She told him what everyone told you when you asked that question. They were a newer species, small in galactic terms, one world, limited reach. Third tier was the entry designation for civilizations still establishing their fundamental presence. Keithan looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said, "is what we told them, and what we have continued telling ourselves." She asked him what he meant. He sat down. He was 91 years old, and he had the kind of gravity that very old people develop when they are about to say something they have been waiting a long time to say. "We classify things," he told her, "according to the categories that help us feel organized. Organized is comfortable. Organized means we understand our situation. Third tier means younger, smaller, still learning. It means we are comfortable with them and they should be comfortable with the number." He paused. "What third tier actually means," he said, "for the humans is that we cannot determine what tier they belong in. We have watched them for decades. We have observed their diplomatic patterns, their trade behaviors, their responses to pressure and to insult and to loss. We have tried to fit them into existing frameworks. They do not fit." She was quiet. Sailvorth was young, but she was not foolish. She heard the shape of what he was saying. "So we gave them a low number," he continued, "so that everyone involved, including ourselves, would feel comfortable." He told her about Corinthus, the full version, not the diplomatic summary. He told her about Crawford and the smile and the apology and the 18 months that followed and the freight corridors that were quietly restructured and the trade relationships that were methodically redirected and the outcome that had no author and no record and no moment you could point to and say, "This is where the decision was made." She was very still while he spoke. Sailvorth had a quality when she was processing something serious. She went completely quiet, the way deep water goes quiet before something moves beneath it. Keithan told her about 3 other incidents, smaller ones, less dramatic, each with the same basic shape: a human party that was publicly diminished or politically sidelined, followed by a period of apparent acceptance, followed by an outcome that was better for the human party and significantly less comfortable for the party that had done the diminishing. He told her about the Vethani water agreement, which looked like a routine resource negotiation until you noticed, 2 years later, that every significant water-adjacent infrastructure project in the outer belt ran through human-aligned supply chains. He told her about the scientific exchange program with the Pellaran systems, which had been dismissed internally as a goodwill gesture with no strategic value, and which had produced, over 8 years, 11 collaborative developments that the Pellaran now depended on and that were licensed through human institutions. He told her about a certain event at Drevani Station, which he described only in outline, because the full version was not something he wanted to say in a room that might have functional recording equipment. But the outline alone was enough to understand why every serious intelligence service in the known systems treated whatever had happened there as the kind of thing you do not look at directly. He told her all of this, and then he stopped. She asked him the question that any intelligent person would ask after hearing those things. What does the human silence mean? Key then looked out the window of her private study. The Capitol was below them, organized and bright and confident. It means, he said, that he has already decided something. We simply do not know what yet. She asked him if they should make contact, reach out, some form of official communication that acknowledged the incident without being a formal apology, which Serenthi protocol did not permit from a reigning queen to a third-tier official. Key then thought about this for a long time. It means, he finally said, that whatever we do next, we should do it carefully. And we should understand that the human attaché has been on this planet for 3 years and has been classified as third tier for 3 years and has been attending our functions and learning our language and eating our food for 3 years. And we have treated all of that as evidence that he is comfortable with his position. He looked at her. It may not be evidence of that, he said. It may be evidence of something else entirely. She spent the rest of that evening rearranging a set of ceremonial stones on the reading table in her private chamber, reorganizing them into different patterns, returning to the original arrangement, starting again. The stones were carved from a material that was warm to the touch, and they clicked softly against each other each time she moved them, and she could not find a configuration that felt right. So she kept going, long after the advisors had left and the palace had gone quiet, just moving the stones from one position to another in the dark. The Serenthi Foreign Ministry sent a communication to our mission on the 5th day. It was addressed to Ambassador Patrick Cole, not to me. It used standard diplomatic language to convey that the ministry was available for ongoing dialogue regarding any matters the Earth mission wished to raise. It did not mention the reception. It did not mention the Queen's words. It was the kind of communication that is designed to open a door without admitting that the door had previously been closed. Patrick brought it to me in person. He sat across from my desk in the small, sparsely furnished office that third-tier missions were allocated, half the size of a second-tier office, a quarter of the size of a first-tier one, located on the 3rd floor of the diplomatic complex with a window that faced an interior courtyard rather than the city, and he put the communication on my desk and waited. I read it. I set it down. "This is the ministry acknowledging that they are aware of you," Patrick said. "Not the Queen, not the court, the ministry. They are putting distance between the institution and the incident." "Yes," I said. "That is a significant shift in posture," he said. "Yes," I said. He looked at me. "Marcus, what do you want to do with this?" I looked at the communication. Plain official language on a formal ministry seal. An open door with no acknowledgement that it had ever been anything else. "Nothing yet," I said. "The Drevani meeting was Category 7, he said. "The Veshan delegation has requested a session. The Pellerin governor's office has made contact. 3 parties in 5 days, none of them Serenthi, all of them considerably above our usual tier of interaction." He paused. "Something is moving." "Yes," I said. "Is it moving because of you?" I thought about that honestly. "It was already moving," I said. "The Verath just made certain people notice." He was quiet. Outside the courtyard window, 2 maintenance workers were doing something to the drainage system. I watched them work for a moment, methodical, patient, each step following from the one before it. "How long have you been building something?" Patrick asked. It was a good question. It deserved a real answer. "I arrived 3 years ago," I said. "I started the day after I got here." He sat with that for a long time. "I am your ambassador," he said finally. "I would like to be informed, whatever you are prepared to share." "When there is something formal to share," I said, "you will be the first to know." He nodded once. He picked up the ministry communication and left. I turned to the window. The maintenance workers had resolved whatever the drainage problem was and were packing their equipment. Below them, the courtyard was exactly as it had been. No sign that anything had been worked on. No visible evidence of the repair. Clean outcomes. No trace of the process. I turned back to my desk and opened the document I had been working on for 19 months. It was 73 pages long. It covered 6 separate categories of proposal, each of which appeared on individual reading to be a routine suggestion for minor improvements to existing cooperative frameworks. Taken together from a certain angle, they were something else entirely. I opened the freight corridor section and began to read it again from the beginning. There is a thing that happens to documents when you have read them enough times. They stop being words and start being something you know, the way you know the layout of a room you have lived in for years, not by looking, but by presence, by familiarity so deep it becomes instinct. I knew this document that way. I read it anyway. Because in 14 days, I was going to present it, and I wanted every line to be exactly right. The invitation arrived on the 9th day. Not from the foreign ministry, not from a consular office or a trade delegation or any of the official channels that had been making careful, sidelong contact since the reception. From the Queen herself, her personal secretariat, addressed to Marcus Vale, Earth Diplomatic Mission, 3rd Tier, requesting the honor of his presence at a private dinner, 8 guests, the Queen's table, 4 days from now. Colin Drake brought it to me. He held it the way you hold something that is heavier than it looks. "This is unprecedented," he said. "Yes," I said. "A 3rd-tier attaché at the Queen's private table." "Yes," I said. "Marcus." I looked up from my desk. "Do you know what this means?" I took the invitation from him. The seal was authentic. The phrasing was correct. The language was formal but had been chosen, carefully chosen, I could tell, to sit halfway between the 11th register and the 6th. Not the register for infrastructure and livestock, not the register for equals. Somewhere in between. An acknowledgement that the previous register had been wrong without being a statement that a different register applied. Small things, significant things. "It means the food will be better than the reception food," I said. Colin made a sound that was approximately what exasperation sounds like when it has been professionally trained into a smaller shape. "Shall I confirm?" he said. "Yes," I said, "and get me a clean version of the Category 7 report from the Drevani meeting. I want to review it before Thursday." He left. I held the invitation for a moment longer. The paper it was printed on was a specific Serenthi material, heavier than standard, used for communications of elevated importance. It felt like something that had been considered before being sent, not a casual decision, not an instinct. A calculation. I respected that. I set the invitation down and opened my document to the section on medical technology exchange, which was the part I was least satisfied with. The language needed to be tighter. The value proposition needed to be cleaner. I worked on it for 4 hours. I ordered dinner from a place 2 streets from the diplomatic complex that made something close to the ugali I had grown up eating, using a local grain that was not quite right but was close enough to be comforting. I ate at my desk. I kept working. At some point after midnight, Leon Marsh, our mission's technical analyst, appeared in my doorway. Leon was 31 years old, precise in the way that people are precise when they genuinely love precision rather than when they are performing it. He had been with the mission for 2 years and had said, in our first meeting, that he was here because he found the Serenthi economic architecture fascinating and wanted to understand it from the inside. He was a useful person to have around. I ran the corridor projections you asked for, he said. And he came in and set a data pad on the desk. If the routing goes through the northern configuration as currently proposed, the primary beneficiaries are the 3 Serenthi-aligned transit hubs. Everyone else gets secondary access at elevated cost. Yes, I said, I know. If, he said carefully, the routing were adjusted at 3 specific junction points, the distribution of access becomes considerably more even. It actually becomes more efficient overall. Lower total transit time across all parties. The math is clean. Yes, I said, I know. He looked at me. The 3 junction adjustments are all in sections of the corridor that are still in early design phase. They are adjustable without significant cost. Yes, I said. So why has no one proposed them? I looked up from the document. Because, I said, the party that proposes them needs to be a party that the primary beneficiaries of the current design do not feel threatened by. If a first-tier mission proposed those adjustments, the Serenthi-aligned hubs would see it as a challenge to their interests and resist. If a third-tier party proposes them, they look like a good-faith minor suggestion from an entity that does not have enough leverage to be threatening. Leon was quiet for a moment. And then, he said slowly, when the adjusted routing becomes standard infrastructure, and when every party in the corridor owes part of their access efficiency to the design that the third-tier mission contributed. Go home, Leon, I said, get some sleep. He picked up his data pad. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Marcus, he said. Yes. How long have you been thinking about this? I started thinking about freight corridors, I said, about 3 weeks after I arrived on this planet. He left. I turned back to the medical technology section. The language still was not right. I kept working. The dinner was in a room I had not seen before, which was notable because I had spent 3 years learning the diplomatic spaces of the Serenthi capital and had developed a reasonably complete map of the formal geography of this court. The room was small by court standards. Round table, 8 chairs as promised, 6 guests besides myself and the Queen, 2 senior advisors, 2 trade officials, and 2 figures whose designations I noted carefully and did not react to visibly, because one of them was the lead architect of the Northern Freight Corridor project, and one of them was the Serenthi Ministry's chief strategic planner. Not a social dinner. A conversation that had been shaped to look like one. I respected that too. Sailvorith was already seated when I arrived. She stood briefly when I was announced, a gesture that was not required by protocol for a third-tier guest, and which therefore meant something. She had dressed formally but not elaborately, and the bioluminescent formal wear that Serenthi royalty typically wore at official functions was absent. She looked, in that room with those 8 people, like someone who had chosen to be present rather than to be impressive. Good choice. Her instincts were developing. The food was, as I had predicted to Colin, considerably better than the reception food. No Varath. I noted that specifically and appreciated it without mentioning it. Conversation moved the way conversation moves at a table where everyone is skilled at making deliberate things sound accidental. Trade frameworks, cultural exchange initiatives, the general shape of the outer systems and their various developing complications. Everyone around the table was contributing information and receiving information and calibrating each other carefully, and the Queen was watching all of it with those precise, processing eyes. Halfway through the 3rd course, she asked me a direct question. Not a conversational one, not a transitional bridge to a different topic. A direct question, asked with the specific tone of someone who has decided that the indirect approach has a cost she is not willing to pay. What did you decide, she said, when you walked away? The table went slightly quieter. Conversations at adjacent distances have a way of noticing when something significant enters a room. I set my utensil down. Nothing yet, I said. That is not true, she said. She said it without any particular emphasis, not as a challenge, as an observation, the way you correct a small factual error in a document directly, without drama, because the document being accurate matters. I looked at her. She was right, it was not true. I picked up my utensil again. I decided, I said, that you were young. She was still, that deep processing stillness. I decided, I continued, that being young was a fact about you, not a judgment of you. And I decided to wait and observe whether you were the kind of young that learns from what it encounters, or the kind that does not. The room was very quiet. The freight corridor architect and the ministry strategist were both looking at their plates with the focused attention of people who are listening with considerable concentration. And she said, I finished the piece of food on my utensil. I considered it. The dinner is not over, I said. Something moved across her face. Quick, controlled, something in the family of what relief looks like when it is immediately told to be quiet and sit down. She looked at the table. She looked back at me. I owe you a correction, she said. Not an apology. The word she used in Serenthi was specific. It meant a realignment, a restoration of accurate calibration. It was the closest that Serenthi royal protocol could come to acknowledging error without using the architecture of formal apology. The register I used was incorrect, she said. It does not accurately reflect your status or the status of your mission. Every person at that table understood exactly what she had just said, and exactly how much it had cost her to say it in this company. Under the table, my left hand was flat against my knee, pressing, still. The way it has pressed in difficult rooms for 20 years. The way it pressed at Drevani Station, where I was the only one who came home, a fact I do not discuss and do not explain and do not reference in any filed report, because some things belong only to the people who survived them. Owen Harris would have found this moment funny. Owen found most things funny, which was one of the reasons the silence he left behind still had weight. I did not think about that. I counted the remaining courses on the menu card. 4 more courses. Thank you, I said to the Queen. The dinner continued. The conversation shifted back to trade frameworks and corridor logistics and the general complexity of outer systems diplomacy, and I participated in all of it with the correct level of engagement. And the freight corridor architect said 3 things that I noted internally and would consider for a long time afterward. By the end of the evening, nothing had been decided. No agreements had been made. No documents had been signed or even referenced. But 6 people had sat in a room together and had understood something new about the shape of what was possible. And that is, in the architecture of long-term negotiation, the most important thing that can happen. I was the last guest to leave. At the door, the Queen stopped me. Not formally. She was simply standing near the exit when I reached it, and she stopped, and I stopped, and we stood for a moment in a corridor that was quiet and empty of other people. The proposal, she said. I looked at her. There is a proposal, she said. That is what I have been told, something substantial, something that has been in preparation for a long time. She was watching me with those precise eyes. Would you have brought it forward, she said, if the reception had not happened? I thought about that honestly. It deserved honest consideration. Eventually, I said, through Ambassador Cole's office, through official channels, at some point in the next 8 to 12 months when I felt the timing was correct. But not now, she said, not like this. No, I said, not like this. She absorbed that. I accelerated something, she said. You did, I said. I could see her processing that, turning it over, finding the shape of it. I did not intend to help you, she said. It was not an accusation, just an observation, the factual correction of a misaligned expectation. No, I said, but you did. She was quiet. In the corridor light, she looked younger than she had at the reception. Not weaker, younger. The difference between pretending to a thing and growing into it. Bring the proposal, she said. 14 days after the reception, I submitted a document to the Serenthi Foreign Ministry, the Drevani Consortium, the Veshan Trade Delegation, and the Office of the Pellerin Systems Governor simultaneously. It was addressed jointly to all parties, not routed through Ambassador Cole, though I had briefed him completely 4 days prior, and he had sat in his office for a long time in silence after reading it before asking 2 very precise questions, both of which I answered, after which he had said, "File it. I will not be adding my signature. This should come from you." I appreciated that more than I told him. The document was 73 pages. It covered the Northern Freight Corridor routing, with specific proposed adjustments to 3 junction points that demonstrably improved efficiency across all parties. It covered a framework for medical technology exchange that would establish ongoing collaborative development processes benefiting 16 species across the known systems. It covered a terraforming consultation program that would apply human planetary engineering experience, which was not widely understood to be as extensive as it was, to developing worlds across the outer systems. It covered 3 other categories in similar frameworks, each of which looked, individually, like a reasonable minor proposal from a third-tier mission with good intentions. Together, from a certain angle, they were something else. They were the outline of a relationship, a specific kind of relationship, one in which the party that everyone had been comfortable calling third tier was positioned, in every significant emerging infrastructure development across the next generation of galactic expansion, as a necessary and involved participant. Not a senior partner, not a dominant power, a necessary presence. The kind of presence that, once established, becomes so woven into the functioning of things that removing it would require dismantling things that everyone depends on. The kind of presence that has no number, because it does not fit into a numbered system. Veloreth called me on the 2nd day of the review period. He said nothing about the document directly. He said, "The word I told you about, the Drevani word." "I remember," I said. "I have applied it," he said. He ended the call. Minister Key then called on the 5th day. He was the first Serenthi official to make direct contact with me since the reception. He used the 6th register, the register for equal parties. "The review is proceeding," he said. "Good," I said. "There are aspects that will require additional discussion," he said. "Of course," I said, "I expected that." "The junction adjustments to the corridor routing," he said slowly, "have been noted by our infrastructure team as mathematically sound." "Yes," I said. "Our infrastructure team is frustrated," he said, "that they did not identify them first." "The best ideas," I said, "always look obvious after someone else has had them." He made a sound that was the Serenthi equivalent of a short, dry laugh. "The full document," he said. "How long have you been building it?" I looked out the window of my office. The courtyard below was empty. The drainage system that the maintenance workers had repaired 2 weeks ago was functioning perfectly, with no visible evidence of any prior problem. "I arrived 3 years ago," I said. "I started thinking about this document approximately 1 week after I arrived." Silence. "Before the reception," he said. "Long before," I said. "Before any of this." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that means someone is restructuring something in their mind, rearranging furniture to make room for a piece that is larger than they expected. "The Earth creature," he said. He said it very quietly in a way that was not the 11th register or the 6th register or any formal register at all, just words. "That is what she called you." "Yes," I said. "She was wrong," he said. "Not to me, I thought. to himself, or to the 91 years of experience that had taught him to recognize things that needed to be said out loud in order to become true. She was young, I said. The formal acceptance arrived on the 13th day. Not a complete acceptance. Not every section. 3 of the 6 categories were accepted in principle, with frameworks for continued negotiation on the details. The freight corridor junction adjustments were accepted in full, with a formal acknowledgement that the proposal had originated with the Earth mission. The medical technology exchange was moved to an active development committee. The terraforming consultation framework was flagged for extended review. By any reasonable measure, it was a significant outcome for a third-tier mission. By any honest measure, it was the beginning of something that did not yet have a name. Patrick came to my office that evening with a bottle of something he had been saving. Something from Earth, something real and familiar in a way that a person only understands after 3 years away from home. He poured 2 glasses and set one on my desk without a word. We sat in the small office with the courtyard window, and we were quiet for a while. "The Queen asked me something," he said eventually. "I know," I said. He looked at me. "She asked whether you would have brought the proposal forward if the reception had not happened," he said. "I know," I said. "She told me she was going to ask you." Patrick looked at his glass. "I told her the truth. I told her I did not know, that I had not been aware of the full scope of what you were building and therefore could not accurately assess what the timeline would have been." "That was honest," I said. "She told me," he said, "that she found the answer interesting. That not knowing suggested either that you were operating independently of your own mission's awareness, which would be concerning, or that you had built something that your own senior leadership had not been invited into, which she described as architectural," I said. He looked at me. "Yes," she said, "architectural." He paused. "She did not say it as a criticism." "No," I said, "she would not." Outside, the courtyard was dark. The city beyond the diplomatic complex was the way it always was, bright, organized, certain of the logic it had built itself around. I thought about what Keithan had told her, about the word that had no translation, about the 11 individuals in 340 years, about the thing that had happened at Drevani Station, which no one named directly, but which everyone with serious access to intelligence files understood in outline. I thought about Owen Harris, who had a saying for when situations shifted: "Pay attention when the room changes, because it is telling you something." The room had changed considerably in 14 days. I picked up my glass. "The acceptance covers the corridor adjustments," I said. "That means the next corridor design review cycle will include our input as standard. That is not a one-time concession. That is a structural position." "Yes," Patrick said. "The medical exchange framework puts us on an active committee with parties from 6 species. That is a working relationship with a regular meeting schedule. That is presence." "Yes," Patrick said. "And the Drevani Consortium has indicated informal support for extending the framework principles to the Outer Belt development discussions that begin next quarter." Patrick was quiet. "What I am telling you," I said, "is that the acceptance we receive today is not the outcome. It is the beginning of the actual work. The outcome is 10 years from now, when the things we started building this month are part of the functioning infrastructure of this region, and when the question of what tier an Earth mission belongs to has become too awkward to answer because the answer does not fit the system that generated the question." He looked at me for a long time. "You have been thinking about this for 3 years, he said. "Yes," I said. "And the reception moved the timeline forward by approximately 8 months, I said, and opened conversations that would have taken considerably longer to open through standard channels." He drank from his glass. He looked at the ceiling of the small office. He looked back at me. "She handed you something," he said. "She thought she was taking something," I said. People often confuse those two directions. He was quiet for a while. "Is there anything else I should know about?" he said. "Any other documents I have not been invited into?" I looked at the window. "The terraforming consultation framework," I said. "The one that went to extended review." "Yes." "It is not a consultation framework," I said. "Not primarily. The consultation services are the visible portion. The underlying structure, if developed as I have designed it, establishes a licensing and knowledge access model that puts human institutions at the center of any terraforming or planetary development project in the outer systems for the next 30 years. Patrick set his glass down very carefully. "That is not a minor proposal," he said. "No," I said. "That is the kind of proposal that changes things." "Yes," I said, "that is the idea." He sat with that. "The extended review," he said. "How long do you expect it to take?" 18 months, I said. "Possibly 2 years. They will want to understand what they are agreeing to before they agree to it, which is the correct instinct. And when they understand it, I said, they will also understand that building it with us is considerably more practical than building it without us. Because the expertise they would need to replicate is already documented, already established, and already quietly positioned in places where it is easiest to access through cooperation, rather than through developing it independently." I picked up my glass. "That is why the timeline was always 10 years, I said. "Not because the work takes 10 years, because the understanding takes 10 years. People need to arrive at conclusions in their own time, through their own reasoning. If you tell them the conclusion, they resist. If they find it themselves, they believe it and they act on it, and they do not resent the party that positioned it." Patrick looked at me. He was a good man, careful, experienced. 11 years of Serenthi diplomatic life had given him the ability to sit with large things and not need to immediately put them in a smaller container. "Marcus," he said. "Yes." "Who taught you this?" I thought about that. I thought about the years before Serenthi Prime, the years before Drevani Station, the training programs and the difficult postings, and the things that happened in between that did not get written into official histories, because they were the kind of things that teach through loss rather than through instruction. I thought about Owen Harris, about Nina Carr, about the others I do not name in this account because naming them in any document connected to professional matters has always felt like taking something that belonged to a private space and moving it somewhere public without permission. I thought about the specific weight of being the one who comes home. "Nobody," I said. "You learn it from the things that do not leave you." He nodded. He understood that answer. He was the kind of person who could understand an answer without needing to open it up and examine the inside of it. We finished our drinks. He left. I stayed in the office for another hour, not working, just sitting in the quiet of it, in the small room with the courtyard window that faced inward rather than out toward the city. Somewhere in the center of that bright, shadowless capital, a 26-year-old queen was deciding what kind of ruler she was going to become. She had the intelligence for it. She had the instincts, raw and still developing, that given 10 years of the kind of experience that teaches rather than the kind that simply ages, would make her formidable. She had also, without knowing she was doing it, given a third-tier human attaché the exact circumstances he needed to move a 10-year plan 8 months forward and position it in full view of every party that mattered. I would not tell her that for a while. When I did tell her, and I would, because she deserved to understand it, and because the kind of relationship that was worth building was one built on accurate information, she would be angry for a moment, and then she would think about it, and then she would ask a very specific question. The question she would ask was, would I have told her eventually if she had not asked? The answer to that question was yes. Not because I owed it to her. Because the long work, the patient work, the work that changes things at the structural level rather than just at the surface, only holds if the people involved in it eventually understand what they are part of. Secrets have a weight limit. Past a certain point, they collapse under their own density and damage the thing they were meant to protect. Openness at the right time in the right form to the right person is its own strategy. She would understand that. Give her 10 years, she would understand all of it. I turned off my desk light. I got up. I straightened my gray third-tier sash by habit, though there was no one in the room to see it. Third tier. The designation they had given us because we did not fit the system, and giving us a low number made everyone comfortable. I thought about what Velorath had said. The 11 individuals, 340 years, the word that had no translation. I walked to the door of the small office with the inward-facing window. In the morning, there would be follow-up correspondence to draft, 3 committee meetings to schedule, a preliminary response to the ministry's acceptance to compose carefully, in exactly the right register. There would be a long conversation with Leon about the terraforming consultation licensing structure, and the same conversation with Colin about the category designations for the next round of meeting reports, and probably a call from Velorath that would sound like a casual check-in and would contain, somewhere in the middle of it, a piece of information that I would need to think about for several days. There would be work. There was always work. The work was the point. I turned off the light. I went home. I slept without difficulty, because I always do. The city outside was bright, organized, certain of itself. It looked the same as it had on the night of the reception, 14 days ago, when a 26-year-old queen had made me bow for 11 seconds, and then told 400 people that the lesson in manners was incomplete. It looked exactly the same. Nothing visible had changed. That was the thing about this kind of work. The changes worth making are always the ones you cannot see yet.